Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Well, yesterday we had, I think, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, cabinet shuffles in the history of Canada. And so we got to analyze it. We got to comment on it. We got to figure out who the winners and losers are, what this means. Does it mean the Prime Minister is about to call an election, or is he going to run again, or is he going to give up and take a walk in the, well, it's not snow, but whatever you take a walk on in the fall, the walk in the leaves. And you know what this means for policy, housing, and some of the issues, health, and some of the issues that are so critically important. And so we want to reach out to Rachel Rappaport, who is a government affairs individual with a big government affairs company called Macmillan Vantage. And she spent quite a little time as a staffer, a Liberal staffer on Parliament Hill. So not only does she study this and analyze this and report on this to corporate clients and other people on a regular basis, but she's lived through it. And she wrote a really interesting article that I read in iPolitics that was about the impact of cabinet shuffles on staffers, which I thought was kind of an interesting take, something that probably a lot of us don't realize, that there's this turmoil that goes on Parliament Hill when people are worried about their jobs, worried who their new bosses are going to be, worried about where they're going to look next, et cetera. So Rachel, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Brian.
Thank you for joining us. So tell me, what do you think this all means? Does this, let's start right at the top. Does this mean good things for the Liberal government, bad things for the Liberal government? Trudeau's going to stay, going to leave? What's your sort of overall assessment of what the signal value in this incredibly large cabinet shuffle is?
Yeah, so I think you said it there, right? This is a signal that the government's trying to send out. It's not unusual for a government to pick summertime to shuffle its cabinet, but this one's coming at a particularly important moment. This is a government that is 3 years in to a third mandate, and that's no easy task. And so this is a point where if you're the Prime Minister, you're taking a step back and you're saying, okay, you know, what's next? What do I want to signal for the next election? What are my priorities? And who's the team that I want to carry the banner into that next election? And so you're going to take a look and you're going to say, first and foremost, who's going to run with me the next time around? If it's there's some folks who have been around public service for many years, many decades, who have done this work and who are just saying, you know, this is my time. I'm ready to move on to post-political life.
Okay, hold it. Let me stop you there. Do you think that they're saying this is my time? Or did they get the boot?
Oh, no. Listen, I think that these are some very strong personalities. These are people who have been in public life, in the public eye for many, many years. And so they are deciding when it is their time to go. And you look to somebody like a Carolyn Bennett, who's been in public service. She was a doctor beforehand. She's very, very well known in a Liberal stronghold in downtown Toronto, who's always been in it for the right reasons, has always leaned towards change, towards things that are medical oriented. And so for her to say, you know, this is my time to step back, there's no reason to think it would be anything but her choice.
Okay. And person who came in second in the leadership to Justin Trudeau also is out of cabinet and is announced she's not going to run again. Joyce Murray.
Joyce Murray, yes. Joyce Murray out in British Columbia. Again, somebody who has been around as long as I was around as an opposition staffer. That predates me. I started, I think, back in 2014, and by that point, she'd been an MP for quite some time. So again, these are the kinds of jobs that just take a toll on individuals, on families, on commitments. They're all encompassing. And so it's not surprising that somebody who's done this for years and years and years might say to themselves, okay, you know, maybe I want to do something else. Maybe I want to spend more time with my kids. Maybe I want to do kind of change outside of politics. So
now, new people in some pretty important portfolios.
Yes, indeed. There's a lot of change in this yesterday's cabinet shuffle. You know, more than 30 changes. Well, more than half of the cabinet is changing their roles. We have kind of some big names, people like Bill Blair, who's going out to national defense.
And I think a lot of people thought that the previous Minister of National Defense did a really very good job at the time when, you know, critically important with the war in Ukraine and trying to recruit more people. And lots of people have commented that the Canadian Armed Forces are down like hundreds of thousands of potential manpower, armaments, munitions, etc., ordering new jets, ordering new helicopters, and it goes on. That's a pretty important move.
I'd agree with you entirely. Anita Anand is a star within the cabinet. She's known to be a strong communicator, a strong implementer, which is not always two things that go together, but she definitely fits the bill for that. And she's done a really good job at defense of coming in at a tumultuous time and really kind of making that mandate known. And for her to be moving into Treasury Board, I think is a sign that the government is really trying to paint, which is the big piece. You heard the Prime Minister talk about it a handful of times, but this is about bolstering the strongest economic team that he can, right? Understanding that Canadians are out there and looking at rising grocery bills and mortgages and the cost of raising kids and saying, my pocketbook is hurting. What is this government doing for me?
The Treasury Board is typically thought of as a pretty boring portfolio. It's like cost cutting. It's watching the bills, isn't it?
You know what? I think it's a bit of a misnomer outside of Ottawa. It's thought of as boring because it's not really out there in the public lens, but it's incredibly important. I mean, people like Scott Bryson, people like Tony Clement, it is a senior file for a reason. And it's because, yes, finance is the one that sets the big, broad budget for how things are going to get spent. But then you need somebody who's an implementer, who's going to take a look at every single one of those expenses and say, does this make sense? Does this work? You can't spend a penny in government without it going through a Treasury Board submission. So it's actually quite a powerful and quite a senior role that Ms. Anand is coming into.
Well, it's an interesting development. I think people were expecting a little bit of a cabinet change, but I don't know if they were expecting a shuffle that was this massive, with this many people leaving, this many new people coming on board, and that the vast majority of the balance of cabinet that are staying as cabinet ministers all have got new jobs. There's only a few that have remained in the current job. So we're going to go through some of these winners, these losers, the cabinet posts, what it means for the government in a while, but after the break, we're going to come back. I'm going to ask Rachel about this interesting post that she put on iPolitics, which is about the impact on everyone else in the office. And I think it's something that not a lot of us realize, that there's a lot of other people that get impacted by cabinet shuffles, not just the cabinet members themselves. And there's a lot of jobs, careers that are impacted. And so I thought it was kind of interesting. In 2 minutes, we're going to be back with Rachel Rappaport about what a cabinet shuffle means to the staffers. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Rachel Rappaport. She is a senior consultant with Macmillan Vantage Policy Group, which is a public affairs organization, Toronto and Ottawa, maybe elsewhere, I'm not sure, that provides companies with some strategic advice as to how to deal with public affairs, government issues, etc. And we're talking about the cabinet shuffle that happened yesterday and what it all means. But one of the reasons why I really wanted to reach out to Rachel is she posted this really interesting article in iPolitics about the impact of cabinet shuffles on staffers, the people that work in the cabinet ministers' offices. And the MP's offices. And I thought that was really kind of interesting. I wanted to find out a little bit about it. Let me tell you a little bit about Rachel first, if I could. So as I mentioned, she's a senior consultant with Macmillan Vantage Policy Group. She was, before that, a director of communications in the Office of the Minister of Labour for Canada. Before that, she was the director of communications for the Ontario portion of the federal election campaign in 2021. She was the press secretary and senior communications advisor in the Office of the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. Before that, press secretary in the Office of the Minister of Indigenous Services. Before that, she was the senior communications advisor and speechwriter, and then the special assistant and liaison to the parliamentary secretary for the Minister of Canadian Heritage. She was a parliamentary assistant to the office of Chrystia Freeland, our Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister. She was the parliamentary intern for the office of MP Judy Foote. She was the coordinator for creative services with Mediative, and she was an intern on the Justin Trudeau campaign and a summer volunteer in the constituency office for MP Justin Trudeau. So I think we've got someone that knows what it's like to be a staffer in cabinet, if not a constituency assistant and a constituency worker and a campaign worker for all of these different members of parliament. So Rachel, tell us a little bit about what you wrote in this article, because I found it fascinating.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I was exhausted just listening to my resume going down there, and you're right. I spent quite a long time doing different types of jobs on Parliament Hill and constituency offices and ministers' offices, and of really working with different people. I used to joke that I changed roles every year or a minister every year, one of the two around April. But I got to see a lot of different kinds of things. And I would say, first and foremost, the role of a staffer is it's a privilege. It's a privilege that not everybody gets. It's an opportunity to serve, to learn every single day, and to be around where change happens, to be really at the heart of that. And so, it's a great opportunity to work with different types of people and to work on different types of files. But there are some challenges to it. And so what I wrote about in this piece,
which I
is,
think is fascinating, because you titled it "Anxiety, Job Security, and Betting Pools: What It's Like to Be a Staffer During a Cabinet Shuffle."
So a cabinet shuffle, for your listeners that don't know, is quite a chaotic process to begin with, and quite a secretive one. So the prime minister decides it's time to change up the front bench to get some different players in, and we'll make decisions on the basis of who's been a rising star, who's had their challenges, regional balance, diversity, different kinds of perspectives around the table that you need, different backgrounds. And so it's quite a delicate dance to do. And so the weeks that lead up to a cabinet shuffle, everybody is kind of coming in for their one-on-one meetings with the prime minister, where he tells you, I want you to move here, or unfortunately, there's no space for you here anymore, or welcome to cabinet. I'm so excited to have you here. So there's a lot of excitement and there's a lot of stress and anxiety. But because this process is so secretive, everybody is talking, everybody is trading rumors and trying to get the latest intelligence information. But the people who actually know are the ones who are not doing any talking. It's a very small group within the prime minister's office, typically, and they're really aware that leak can threaten that delicate balance. And so what you find is even the most senior staffers, I was a director of communications, I was a press secretary, have no idea. You're kept in the dark. And so everybody is kind of jostling to try to figure out what it is that's going on and where the prime minister's head might be at. But ultimately, you don't know until the day of the cabinet shuffle whether your boss is keeping their job or not. And that has some pretty serious implications for you as a staff.
So if you're the director of communications or the press secretary to the minister of whatever, do you go with that minister if that minister gets a new job? Do you stay in your the ministry that you were at, or do you don't know what happens?
So it's a giant question mark, Brian. Essentially what happens is you wait around, you watch the cabinet shuffle along with everybody else, and then a new minister gets announced and it's silence. You have all of these questions. Do you go back to your office? Do you have an office anymore? Do you keep planning for next week? Your phone starts ringing. What do you tell people who are asking, what does your new minister think about their file?
Are you the press secretary for health or national defense?
Yeah, and that's just it. There is no certainty there. The other thing that's kind of important, I think, for your listeners to know is by convention, when a new minister is announced, you get a pink slip. You get a 30-day notice that says, thank you very much for your service. Here's the door. And so in some cases, yes, that is conventional. It's so that the minister can choose their own staff, can bring in their own people, can kind of make those decisions and really imprint their vision. But it's also, it does have impact, right? So it gives you 30 days to kind of figure out, do I want to stay with this new minister? Do I have the option? Do I want to go with my previous minister? Is that an option to me? Perhaps I'm, looking at a new file or a promotion. That can be a really exciting time in a staffer's life. But maybe as well, you're kind of towards the end of your career and you're saying, maybe this is the kick I needed to finally move on to try something else, something new. So it's 30 days of questions. And again, depending on where you fall in the chain, it may be some time before you're actually going to find out which positions are open to you. Right. For many ministers, they want to have their chief of staff installed and then their directors installed and then so on. So that means that if you're quite at the beginning of your career, if you're quite junior, you may actually not know for weeks, even months, what your options are.
Now, is this a decision that the ministers make, or is this a decision that someone in the PMO makes?
Bit of a blend. Typically, the Prime Minister's office might have some kind of say, but that is generally speaking with respect to the more senior staff, sometimes the directors, the chiefs of staff. With respect to kind of more junior roles, things like policy desks or parliamentary secretary assistants, of which I was one. Those are really kind of a mix of personal preference, what your background is, what your experience is in the file, as well as kind of what the relationships are like. You know, staff work incredibly closely with their ministers, and so that chemistry is really important. You know, you may think, oh wow, I have a new minister coming in, I love this file, I've been doing it for 5 years, and then the chemistry is just not a good fit. It's a different type of style, and so that might make you say, well, maybe it's time to look elsewhere.
Well, even if you've got great chemistry, if you've been dealing for the last couple of years with national defense, and all of a sudden your minister goes from national defense to the Treasury Board, and you're, got to change your whole policy orientation, what the key priorities are, the stakeholders that you talk to, and stuff like that. Does it make sense to move?
You know, it's funny that you say it. I was just having this conversation with, I used to be at the Justice Office, and obviously at Justice, there's a lot of lawyers, and lawyers are among those kind of more specialist staffers. They generally came in with a different career, and kind of saying, well, what if Justice gets changed? Do I go elsewhere? My background's in law, so like that's how I ended up at Justice, but maybe I should think about switching, think about going elsewhere, think about maybe leaving. So it's a really, really personal decision for staff, and one that is quite anxiety provoking if it's something that you've been doing for 5-10 years of your life. A lot of staff start right out of an undergraduate degree and kind of work their way up like I did. And then you kind of turn around and say, at some point, that as great an opportunity as it is, and as great a privilege as it is, that at some point there is no job security, and either you can choose the date of your exit, or an election might choose it for you.
You described it as people going through their own private hell.
Yeah, my phone ran off the hook yesterday and the days leading up to it with people who just are thinking, well, all of these what ifs, all of these questions. And, as I mentioned, I was a director of communications. I was a press secretary. I was directly affected by 2 shuffles.
Tell me what happened. Did you
well,
go with the minister, or did you stay?
Well, so in both cases, I didn't know. First and foremost, I learned about my fate the night before from a CBC News alert that told me my minister would be moving. And so in the first case, I was a press secretary at Indigenous Services. I was very, very deeply involved with the issues that we were dealing with. There was a housing crisis that was ongoing in Northern Ontario at the time. And so it was really important to me to kind of stick that out and to work with the minister who came in. And I did so for about 3-4 months until I got the opportunity to move to what was a dream file for me, and that was Justice.
And so was it that your minister that recruited you to Justice, or a brand new minister?
It was actually the new minister who recruited me. It was Minister Lametti at the time. He had just come in for a few months, and a good friend of mine was the press secretary before me, and kind of said, she was thinking about making her leave. She wanted to go into the public service, and did I want my name to be put forward? And that was always my dream job. So that was the opportunity of a lifetime for me.
So in that case, you stayed with the ministry for a while, 3 months, but then moved to something else. Did you ever go with the minister from one spot to another?
I didn't. Actually, in the second case, I was the director of communications at Labour, and I came on working with Minister Tassi, who's wonderful, who took a little bit of a step back from cabinet for family reasons last summer. Actually, sorry, what am I saying? Minister Tassi is still in cabinet. There were so many changes yesterday. It's just wild. So she is still, let me correct myself, the minister responsible for Southern Ontario, but she did not change her file. But in the case of Minister Tassi, it was just a wonderful opportunity to work with somebody who was so passionate and so involved in the community, and was really looking to kind of work to work on her public image with respect to just doing more media and getting out there and selling her message and telling her story to Canadians. So it was a great opportunity for me. And then it came after what was my third election. And as you mentioned off the top, I was the Director of Communications for Ontario in the last election. Again, an incredible opportunity to meet people, to learn things, to work with candidates, and to talk about some really important issues. But at that point, I had started seeing the exit signs for myself and recognizing that, you know, maybe it was my time to look at doing something new. And so when the cabinet shuffle came about and Minister O'Regan came into our file, he was very gracious when I told him that it just looked like I was ready. I was ready to make my exit. And so that was my decision.
You described this as hundreds of people impacted. Give us a sense of, I don't know if there is a typical, but in the typical minister's office, how many people we're talking about? And what are the job functions?
Yeah, so there's about 15 to 20 people for every minister's office, sometimes a little smaller, sometimes a little bit bigger, depending on kind of the size and scale of the ministry. Typically, there's 3 groupings. So every office will have a chief of staff who runs the day-to-day affairs, makes sure everything is going well, is briefing the minister, attending cabinet with them, taking care of the really, really big ticket items. And then under the chief of staff, you'll typically have your 3 groupings. You'll have communications, director of communications, have press secretaries, you might have speech writers, communications planners, depending on kind of the nature of the work that you're doing, to really kind of talk about the message and make sure that you're communicating clearly. That second grouping is policy. So you'll have your director of policy. Sometimes you'll have kind of regional desks. Sometimes they're more specific to files, to particular needs. So that's your policy group. And then your third group is your parliamentary affairs group. And these are the people who are responsible for the House of Commons. So your director of parliamentary affairs, also called a DOPA around the hill, and a legislative assistant, pretty typical, as well as parliamentary affairs and parliamentary secretary assistants. So these are people who monitor things like cabinet committees, who do things like bills that are making their way through, who might do caucus affairs. Depending on your ministry, if you're looking at something that perhaps travels a lot, you might need somebody who runs operations and tours. That's another role. And there's obviously administrative functions as well. So it's a big team. It's a big team of people who come together because they want to serve and they want to do right by their country.
It is a lot of people. I didn't realize that there was that many people. We're going to take a break and we're going to come back after 2 minutes and talk a little bit more with Rachel about who actually moved and why she think they moved and what the impact is going to be on government policy. You know, it's interesting, the impact on the people. Let's now talk about how the impact on the country is. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Yesterday was the biggest shuffle in Canadian history of our cabinet. And we've got Rachel Rappaport, who has been a Liberal staffer on Parliament Hill for a long period of time. She now works with Macmillan Vantage. And she's corrected me during the break that she doesn't do any lobbying. And so, Rachel, what do you actually do if you don't do the lobbying? I don't understand it.
So predominantly, I do communications. I do what I did with ministers, working on media relations, working on messaging, on strategic kind of planning, and helping organizations, helping businesses get their message out there. Occasionally, I will advise on some government affairs work, but I don't directly lobby. I'm not allowed to by law, and I have great colleagues who do that kind of work. So I predominantly stay on the communication side of things.
That's interesting. So what's the law that prohibits you from lobbying?
It's the Lobbying Act. And so any staff who has served for a minister has the same rules that a minister has, which is a 1-year cooling off period. You're not allowed to go work for any organization or business that has directly lobbied you for a 1-year time period. And then you have a 5-year lobbying ban. So you are not allowed to lobby the federal government. I could lobby provincial governments or municipal governments, but I am banned for 5 years for lobbying or doing any direct engagement advocacy on behalf of a client for for federal purposes.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. That's interesting. I'm frankly, I'm glad that lobbying act is there and that you are prohibited from lobbying for 5 years. So that makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about some of the people that you think are the performers that have been rewarded with big new posts. So we talked about Anita Amand already, who's moved from National Defense to Treasury. And I do think that she's performed very well in National Defense. What are some others?
So I think Sean Fraser is one of the biggest winners of the day. He's been rewarded. He's an MP from out east. He's quite a tall individual, so people may notice that from photos of him. He's a very strong speaker. Worked quite hard on his French, a lawyer, a father of young kids, I believe, and is just somebody who's really proven himself an adept communicator and an adept implementer. And so he was at immigration before, and now he's moving into housing. And housing, it's interesting what they've done here. He's been made, and I'm looking at my sheet for the exact name, but he's become the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities. So that they've really taken housing and supercharged it. They've made it its own thing, and that just goes to show where the government's putting its priority, which is on housing insecurity. It's on mortgages. It's on the things that Canadians are worrying about in this post-pandemic wake. But just in general, the cost of living is incredibly high, and we have a deficiency of housing units available. So to put somebody like a Sean Fraser, who is a strong kind of star up and comer, into that file signals a lot about where the government's priorities are.
The leader of the New Democratic Party, Jagmeet Singh, came out very strongly in his very first comment about the shuffle, saying that it was going to do nothing to address the housing issue, and he criticized the government for doing nothing on housing in a long period of time. Is that true, do you think?
Well, I don't think that's fair. I think, it's easy for opposition to try to paint that narrative. But ultimately, the government's role in housing is to be a convener. A lot of it is done at a provincial and municipal level. But the government has done what it can in its own jurisdiction, things like the first-time housing benefit that's available, working with provinces. Really, housing has been a plank of the last platform of the Liberal government, and got quite good grades from some of the organizations, from some of the nonprofits that looked into housing and the initiatives that are there. And so I think what you're seeing here is a real statement of the importance of housing, but also, broader speaking, that the importance of economic issues as a whole and pocketbook issues as a whole. This is a government that has done things like the Canada Child Benefit that has lifted tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty, and given parents a little bit of a break to be able to afford some of those kind of rising costs for their kids.
So that's another one. Who else do you think has got a big new portfolio?
Well, so I think Duclos is an interesting one. So Minister Duclos, out of Quebec City, been with the government, been a minister since 2015, started at Families, and spent the last few years at Health, and is now moving over into public services and procurement. And Minister Duclos' reputation is one of being quite steady, quite good with public service, quite good at big issues, and good at building relationships and convening people around the table. So, something like the delivery of dental, which is an important part of the Liberal NDP coalition.
What? Did you call it a coalition?
I heard myself say it and then I pulled myself back. Not coalition. The agreement
Stephen
that
Harper
is
would love
in
you
place.
to hear those words.
I know. Listen, at this time, I had to pull myself back here. And so
supply and confidence agreement.
The supply and confidence agreement. Thank you, Brian. The supply and confidence agreement, dental is a big part of it. And so you need somebody who has that kind of a reputation, that kind of an ability to actually get stuff done, to lead that work. And so I think Minister Duclos is a great choice for that, and it makes a lot of sense.
Okay. What else? Who else?
Who else? So we have Dominic LeBlanc. Dominic LeBlanc, a longtime stalwart of the Liberal Party, a trusted and quite outspoken minister who has done a great job at intergovernmental affairs, really working on some tough relationships there, particularly with the Conservative premiers, and just really trying to find that common ground on some difficult issues. And so Minister LeBlanc has been given a hard task. He has been given the job of 3 ministers, not 1. So he's become the minister of, he keeps intergovernmental affairs, but he also has democratic institutions, and he also has public safety. That is a tall order for anyone. I will say, if there's somebody who can do it in cabinet, it is Minister LeBlanc, but that's no easy task.
Okay. Any others?
Oh gosh, there's so many. There was somewhat like 38 changes, I think, that happened over the course of yesterday. Somebody who isn't changing their job necessarily, but has gained a different kind of title is Minister Wilkinson. And obviously the natural resources file is very important to this government with respect to energy transition, with respect to green energy, something that we saw a lot of in the last budget. And so interestingly, he has become the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. So there's certainly a signal there about the importance of energy, of things like perhaps hydrogen, of things like critical minerals, and the work that he's been doing there, both at home and abroad, to kind of shore that up with respect to the electric vehicles market that we're trying to build here. And so that's kind of an interesting change. He remains kind of one of the top performers, somebody who is very strong and has a lot of work on his plate.
Chrystia Friedland and I'm going to pronounce the name wrong, Philippe Champagne have kept their jobs. What do you think of that?
Yeah, so there's certainly some continuity around the cabinet table. We have, as you mentioned, Minister Joly, Minister Freeland, Minister Champagne. These are people who have challenging jobs, who have been doing a very good job of it. Minister Joly building relationships around the world, dealing with the war in Ukraine, has been able to earn herself quite a strong reputation in the diplomatic circles. Minister Champagne has had a few good wins of late that have kind of propelled him up there. So I think it's important for this government to show that kind of continuity that is still there, but to really recognize that it's about these pocketbook issues that people are worried about. I heard the other day somebody said, I don't care who's where, I don't care who's moving. I care about the fact that I don't know if I can afford my groceries next week.
What about,
that's something the government has to take really seriously.
No question. What about new people that have come in, brand new cabinet ministers?
We have 7 newbies, which is a lot by any metric of cabinet shuffles. Generally speaking, you'd see 1 or 2, maybe 3. Here, 7 is quite a few. And so we have a few interesting players from the GTA. We have people like Gary, and I'm going to pronounce his last name wrong, Ananda Sangari, who's a wonderful MP from Scarborough Rouge River. He is somebody who's been with this government since, I believe, 2015. He's been a parliamentary secretary in several different files, multiculturalism, Indigenous affairs, and he's just somebody who's really well liked by caucus, a great community organizer, somebody who's really in touch and outspoken for his community. So I think this was a long time coming for Gary. A lot of people happy to see it, and you saw it in the room when he was sworn in today, that there was definite support in the room. So there's Gary. There's also from the GTA, Yara Sachs, who's an MP from York Centre. Quite a difficult riding, a bellwether riding. And Yara is a single mom of 2 daughters, an outspoken policy advocate. She served as a staffer well back in the day, but she's really taken a strong stance in and around mental health, which, as we know, is hugely important for so many Canadians. Post-pandemic, challenges beforehand too, but just really kind of about alleviating some of the suffering that's going on and increasing access to services.
I think that riding borders the riding held by the deputy leader of the Conservative Party, does it not?
It very well might. It's been a while since I've looked at my map, so I might have to defer to you on that one. But certainly a riding that was in play and that was pretty tight the last time around. But again, just somebody, I think the trend that you're seeing here is somebody who's just a good communicator, really good on a door, great in front of a microphone, and comes off authentic.
And what happened to Mississauga?
What happened to Mississauga? So we have Richie Valdez, who's a bit of a surprise, new on the scene, elected in the last election. I worked with Richie quite a bit during the last election, where she just came off as somebody who's deeply in it for the right reasons, very connected to her community, comes in with kind of an interesting mixed background. She had 20 odd years in the banking sector before kind of moving over, starting her own business. I think a chain of bakeries in and around Mississauga. So kind of bringing that to her new role as Minister of Small Business. But I think interestingly, she's also a young mom, and these are the kinds of things that don't necessarily get talked about by the pundits on the day of. But that kind of perspective in and around the table of what it's like to balance and to try to address the issue that young parents are facing in Mississauga and really right across the country. Those are the perspectives that you need on the various issues when you're debating them at the cabinet table.
I've heard some disappointment that Charles Sousa didn't get a post, and he won a surprising victory in the last by-election.
Yes, indeed. There was definitely some people who were surprised to not see Charles Sousa come in. There's a number of names I think that have made their way around. Like I said, kind of in my last segment, there's a lot of speculation leading into these, and a lot of very deserving people. And it's not easy to build a cabinet. You have to take a whole bunch of different considerations into mind, whether that's kind of the backgrounds that people are bringing in, their regional differences, language. So it's no easy balance to get right. But I think Richie's going to surprise a lot of people. She was really committed when I worked with her to kind of doing politics differently, to communicating differently. She's built herself a presence on social media, and she's really interested in getting in touch, not just with older voters, but as well younger voters, and really reaching kind of a demographic that may not be as connected as kind of the older generation.
What about people that didn't get cabinet posts? You've mentioned Carolyn Bennett and some others that are choosing to retire, but there's some that aren't retiring. And part of the job of cabinet shuffles is removing from cabinet people that weren't performing. No?
Yeah, no, that's probably one of the hardest parts of a cabinet shuffle is, as you're pulling new people in, inevitably there are people that are going to have to move out. There's only so many spaces. And so what you've seen, as you mentioned, is people like Minister Mendicino, who is the Minister of Public Safety, who has had a challenging few months by any measure with the Paul Bernardo transfer and everything that went with that. So I think there were not a lot of surprised faces to learn that he wouldn't be re-entering cabinet. He is a strong performer in Eglinton Lawrence, where he is the MP, and a lovely individual, I should say. And so, he has come out with a very gracious statement, talking about some of the things that he's achieved and committing to run again in the next election. And, we wish him all the best in that. So of course, there's him. There's Mona Fortier, the Minister of the Treasury Board in Ottawa, who has had again quite a challenging few months. She had to deal with the very large public service strike that was across the country, tens of thousands of workers, and the communication for that was not easy. And so I think she took some flack on that, and perhaps that factored into the decision. And then the third one, which is probably the head scratcher of the bunch, is Minister Lametti, the Justice Minister, who by all accounts is somebody who was never really shiny, but was always a steady hand. And so Minister Lametti had a reputation kind of across party lines, with his conservative critics, with his NDP critics, of being liked, being a respected jurist. He was a law professor. well liked by the judiciary and by judicial stakeholders, as well as, by the Italian Canadian community, of which he was quite proud to belong to. So that one is the one that I'm kind of scratching my head the most about and wondering what happened there. Again, you never really know. It's up to a small group of people, and the Prime Minister makes decisions for the reason the Prime Minister makes decisions. But that one was a bit of a heartbreaker for me.
I was really surprised that Omar Al Gabra decided to retire, and/or it was decided that he would retire. What do you think happened there?
Well, I think Omar is, again, one of these people who has been in public service most of his life, dedicated himself to the Mississauga community, extremely involved, has had some very, very difficult files, transport being the latest. And so nobody tells somebody like Omar that they're going to step down. Omar, or I should say Minister Al Gabra, makes that decision on his own. And so I think what you're seeing here is him saying, it's my time. He put out a video. He's done interviews about his time in public service and about why he thinks that this is the right choice for him to make right now, while still being proud of your legacy.
Well, it's interesting to see who the winners, the losers, the people that are leaving politics, the people that have got great new futures during this cabinet shuffle. We're going to have to take a final break and come back, and I'm going to ask Rachel what this all means. Does it mean that Trudeau's going to stay to fight another election? Or does he mean he's going to call it early election? Or does this mean that he's setting up some of these people that have maybe kept their portfolios to run in a leadership campaign when he decides to leave? Stay with us, everyone. And we're going to come with the final decision in our final segment about what this all means. Stay with us, everybody. I've had fun tonight. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960, chatting with Rachel Rappaport. I've had fun chatting about this cabinet shuffle yesterday, the biggest cabinet shuffle in history, where people have left politics, people have got great new jobs, people have entered the cabinet, and some people have been demoted out of the cabinet. And it's tough to read the tea leaves, but Rachel, what do you think these tea leaves mean? Does it mean that he's setting up Chrystia Freeland and Minister Champagne and maybe Wilkinson to be future leadership campaign candidates? Or is he staying? Or is he going to call a snap election this fall? Or what do you think?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. I think first and foremost, the Prime Minister has not minced words. So he has said, "I am running in the next election." End of sentence. And so there's no reason to think that there would be anybody else coming up. The Prime Minister is getting ready to lead, and he's building the team, likely the final team that's going to carry the banner into that next election. And so to your second question, when is that election going to be? There might be some people saying, does this mean a snap election? I don't think that that's what we're seeing here. I think that fall is quite unlikely. There's the fall economic statement that would usually come in and around kind of late fall, early winter. That would be kind of the earliest that one might see an election called, and even then, I think that we're probably in this for at least another year, if not two, as long as that supply agreement holds. I think you're going to see this government continue. Oh my gosh, I'm never going to live that one down.
Stephen Harper loved it when you said it.
Oh well,
So you think that this is the cabinet for the election campaign? You think this indicates that Justin Trudeau, our Prime Minister, is going to run again? He's committed to it, and you don't think it's going to be an early election? It's going to be either the end of the supply agreement or beyond that, in fact.
Yeah, I think spring is really the earliest possibility that you'd see that happening. But I think this is going to go to the end of that supply agreement. There's really kind of no reason to call an election before that, unless something happens. And, I could be proved wrong. I don't have a crystal ball in front of me. But really, I think that any of kind of the onlookers are going to say spring, likely the earliest you'd see. And this is the team that he wants to put forward. The people that you've seen promoted are your strongest communicators, your fixers, your implementers, the people who are known for getting things done and for being able to talk about them. Because, as great as things like the Canada Child Benefit are, things like the grocery rebate are, they don't they don't have the full effect if people don't know that they're happening. And so, contrast that with a Pierre Poilievre who's out there on the doorstep, who's had some really, really good success with talking about things like inflation and pocketbook issues. And you have to put forward a team that says, we get it, we're here, and we're doing it.
The piece that you did in iPolitics was really quite fascinating because it talked about all the staffers. And I'm surprised that you said there's that many staffers. I think you said 10 to 15 people in every cabinet minister's office times, 38 cabinet members or something like that. That's a lot of people. But just the number of cabinet ministers that have changed. I run an operation of comparable size, an office of comparable size to the cabinet, not of all the ministers, but of the cabinet. And I can imagine moving 2 people maybe at a time, hiring somebody, letting someone else go. But to move this many on the same day, it's from just a pure human resource standpoint, from a logistical standpoint, that's a massive undertaking.
It is.
And to try to keep it secret.
Right. It takes a team, and it takes a very, very tiny team to make sure that this doesn't get out. Because like you've said, there's all of these staff that are around that are going to support this. But I should also mention it's not just the staff. There is a massive public service who are, in there doing their jobs every single day, who may be affected by this, who may have jobs that are directly affected by this. So, deputy ministers, associate deputy ministers, all the way down.
So they all stay, but they do get new bosses.
They get new bosses. They have to prepare new briefing materials. They need to figure out, how do we move things around? How do we address the new minister's priorities, which may be quite different from the former ministers. So it's not a walk in the park for anyone. It's change, and change goes part and parcel with political and with public service life. That's just the way that it goes. But ultimately, these are jobs, whether you're a minister, whether you're a political staffer, whether you're a public servant, that are a privilege because you get to serve and you get to do some really wonderful things for your community and for your country.
Rachel Rappaport, thank you so much for joining us tonight and helping us unpack and understand what happened yesterday in the biggest shuffle in Canadian cabinet history. It'll be interesting to see whether your predictions come true, and it'll be interesting to see how these new cabinet ministers and these moved cabinet ministers perform in their new jobs. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you, Rachel, for joining us. That's my show for tonight. I'll remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from Ottawa, at www.saga960am.ca. Good night, everybody.